Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to the April wrap-up. And I don't know about y'all, but my April went by like that, and part of that has to do with the fact that we got the call about a week into the month, and now I am social isolating with a small child. So my world has kind of entirely shifted, and as a result, a lot of the things I read are very different than what I had intended to. April was Indie April, and I was going to read all of these indie books and do so many reviews, and that all flew right out the window. I stopped vlogging because that's not really a thing you can do when there's someone in the house whose face you can't show on social media. So I still managed to read all indie. Yay me for that. And I did get some review books read. And as usual, I'm going to start with my review books and have the links down in the description below if you'd like to see more. In one case, I will actually have to come back later and add it. So here's hoping that I did. And then I'll finish out the rest of the books I read that weren't reviews. So let's jump right in. First up is Chasing Danger by Richard C. White. This is kind of like an alternate fantasy noir detective style series of short stories all about this private eye who must solve murder slash like track down stolen things, but it's a world where like fairies and fae folk and a bunch of other magical creatures are just accepted parts of it. I liked the idea, however, I thought the stories were a little bit squished and could have used a lot more breathing room. Next up was This Time by Ozza Davis. Editing Margaret here. I am constantly getting this book's title mixed up with the first one. The sequel is called That Night. The first one is called This Time. I'll get it right eventually. Is the sequel in the Nadira Holden series, all about a young demon hunter brought back from the dead. And in this book, it was a little bit hard of a read for me because she spends so much of the book depressed, and this is not a very good time to read a book about someone who is depressed and struggling with life. But I will still continue with the series because I am still a big fan of it. I just think this one probably wasn't the strongest. The next review book is And Then We Vanish by D.H. Schleicher. This is an author I've reviewed before who loves dark things, and in this case it continues. This is a collection of short stories over the course of his career, focusing somewhat on people vanishing or kind of falling out with each other. I loved the concept. I thought the portrayal of social media and people who use social media was a little bit outdated, so I had to knock it down a star. But if you like short story collections, it's a definitely good pick. Up next was No Water for the Desert by Brittany Buckner. This is an NA contemporary all about a young woman who moves in with her aunt for the summer to try to get her life together after both a childhood traumatic situation involving statutory rape and also her boyfriend and coming out as gay and that whole thing collapsing. I appreciated this book for how raw it was. There was a immature porn star as a side character that I wish was a little bit less of a stereotype, but other than that, a great book club type contemporary book with a lot of thick themes, although the book itself is fairly short. And last, the book that I have not actually put out the review for yet because life is weird, and that is Dragon Destined by Kara Lockhart and Cassie Alexander. This is the sequel to Dragon Called, my new favorite schlocky paranormal romance series all about a young Asian American nurse, own voices, that falls for a billionaire shifter who can turn into a dragon. I loved it. It continues to be schlocky and kitschy in all the best ways. And if I remember to get the review up, I hopefully will also have that link down below after the fact. Alright, so now we are up to the books that didn't get reviews, and these were a little bit weirder. So first of all, let's talk about the one that I read before life just went insane, and that is Cluster by Jessica Conwell. This is a contemporary, I believe, new adult story all about a young trans woman who is trying to figure out what her life is supposed to look like when pretty much all of her friends announce that they're leaving her. And I was really intrigued by the concept. It is own voices trans, so I was really intrigued by that. I did the first chapter taste test a while ago and I liked it, so I wanted to continue reading it now. The only thing was that the non-linear storytelling of it really got in the way, wherein there were so many flashbacks to things instead of just a linear storytelling, which I don't usually mind, but in this case, in the middle of the story, it skips ahead several years and then tells you what happens over the course of those years, and part of me is like, if it was really so important, why didn't we see it in real time or in like shorter jumps? Because some major like character development and like personal development of the protagonist happens in that intervening 2 years. And so to just jump ahead and be like, oh yeah, this character is functionally different now, and then in flashbacks, we're going to show you why. That bugged me a little bit. The ending isn't terribly final. It's a little bit open-ended. I think it's supposed to read kind of like a memoir, but I'm not sure. And in the end, I feel like it was a victim of experimental storytelling, and maybe more standard storytelling would have benefited it more. But I still love that it was an own voices trans character and still has a lot to say about that. So I would still definitely suggest it. And then comes the weirdness. I tried so hard to keep reading review books, but my brain was fried in more ways than one. And so I decided to fall back on what was once the number one way I read indie books, and that is I would find a series that seemed kind of interesting off of BookBub. I would get the first book for free, and then I would read it, and then I would just keep buying it and binge read this one series. So in that way, I read the first 4 books in the Wildfire Sisters series by Zoe Chant, and that is Wildfire Griffin, Wildfire Unicorn, Wildfire Sea Dragon, and Wildfire Pegasus. These are standalone books technically, however they do play into a larger overreaching theme and storyline, but it revolves around this group of hotshots, aka the firefighters that go in on the ground to fight forest fires, and them all being like magical shifters and all finding their true mates. And it goes one by one, and what I really loved about it was there's this found family dynamic. All of the shifters on this team genuinely love each other. I also appreciated the diversity, not only in the actual like ethnicities of the cast, but also there are a lot of neurodiversity. A lot of neurodiversity. Yes, there is a lot of neurodiversity. I can speak. For example, the human character that ends up being one of the shifters' mates in the first book, Wildfire Griffin, is autistic, and there's another character later on that has an anxiety disorder, another character that has ADD, and I loved that it had all of these sorts of diversity that you don't usually see in romance novels. In a lot of cases in romance novels, like, oh look, there's a black character, we're diverse now. But I appreciated this. I have not finished it. There's at least a couple more books from where I stopped, but I had finally sated myself when I got to the end and I wanted to switch to some other things. But as I have found moving in to May, I have continued to just do that, where I find that one ebook series and just read it, occasionally stopping for review or else reading a review book a little bit each day alongside it, because right now, I mean, I'm a first-time foster parent in a pandemic. I can't stretch my brain that far, so I'm sticking with what I know I can read quickly and a lot of and really enjoy, as opposed to trying to be super analytical when I know that there are some days when I am this close to the edge. Going along with that, I decided to pick up Beyond Shamed by Kit Rocha. I read their first book in the Mercenary Librarian series, which is still not out, and I am so sad for you guys because I love that book. This one is about another dystopian world. Apparently they're a big fan of romances in dystopia. Also, BTW, Kit Rocha is not one binary person. They are 2 women working together. But this is all about a young woman who is thrown out of this city that's this kind of utopian but also puritanical city for doing impure things, and ends up on the outskirts in the slums and basically meets up with a gang. And there's so many sex scenes. Just, oh my gosh. So much sex scenes. Not a lot of monogamy in the sex scenes, but as strange as it sounds, and it's weird, it's going to be weird to say this about an erotica, too much. Almost like too many sex scenes. To the point where I was like, is there a plot? And then I would forget what the plot was. And then we'd go back to the plot and be like, oh yeah, there is a thing. So definitely you can see the growth. This is the beginning of, I think, their first series. And obviously what I just read and reviewed is like one of their latest books. And there's at least like half a dozen, if not a dozen books in between there. So I've probably, seen the growth in the writing, which is why this book didn't hit as perfect a note as the Mercenary Librarians book did. And I'm not opposed to continuing with the series, but right now it's not the one that I want to binge. And like I said before, I gotta focus on what I know I love and not try to really force myself that much. Up next was a super, super short read, like whopping 15 pages, but I thought it was adorable, and that is The Night Summer Ended by Creed. She was one of the people that I mentioned in, I think it was episode 2 of Some Good Bookish News, and also she is a part of the BookTube Hype Squad that I am also in, so I thought, oh, you know what, it's a 99-cent poetry book, I can read it in a day, and I did, and I loved that the poetry wasn't all about sad relationships ending, which seems to be so much of what modern poetry is. It was actually done in a 4 seasons format wherein a lot of the poems were focused on either the seasons and what they represented in symbolism, or literally talking about the beauty of Canadian nature. Which I got really confused at one point because there was a poem that both mentioned like a bald eagle and this country, and then it talks about maple leaves, and I was like, what? But no, it's all about Canadian wilderness and nature and the beauty of it. And it was a nice light read. There's also some photography, which I believe was also taken by Kuria. So I appreciated that a lot. And the only downside to this one is I believe it is only on Nook, if I remember correctly. But beyond that, I really enjoyed it. And the last one, me going back to that one series I got the first one for free for and want to continue binging. I read Stitches and Witches by Nancy Warren. This is a sequel to the Vampire Knitting Club book. It is basically cozy mystery meets vampire book, and I love it. The take on vampires in this book is just adorable in a weird way. Like, yeah, there's still like that one brooding vampire that's like probably going to be the love interest at some point, and maybe a love triangle, and it speaks for how much I enjoy the rest of this book that it doesn't bug me too much there's a love triangle, mostly because the author is smart and has been downplaying it. But this is all about a young woman who has both discovered that her grandmother, who technically died and passed her knitting shop on to her, isn't actually dead, but a vampire, and also that she is a witch, and so now she must learn witchy things while also keeping her grandmother from wandering through the shop that is full of people that think she's dead. And I love it, and I've already started the third one as of recording this, and this will probably be the series that I continue to binge through May, but also I am going to try to get more review books read ahead of time because I know that I need to get those out, and I'm kind of at war with myself right now because part of me is like, you're at home, it's self-isolation, you can be reading more. The other part of me is like, it's okay if what you're reading is light, fluffy stuff, because doing this, having a child in the house in a time like this, after, you know, every child in the situation has some level of trauma, it's a lot on your brain. And I even had one of the workers from DHS tell me today, she goes, I would not be in your shoes for anything, so I'm glad you can do this. So I'm trying to take it easy on myself. I am not having fun hanging out at home. I am self-isolating as a caregiver. It is very different and a very different setup, and I'm trying to give myself leeway to read my nice, light, fluffy indie ebooks that I love and that have given me so much joy. But I also know that there's a bunch of people who have books releasing in May, most of whom those releases have already passed. But anyway, I will try to get more review books out as best as I can. So if you do have a review book with me, you're probably going to need to be a lot more patient right now. But I hope to get as many out as possible. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.